going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 2 live stream for the ZOZO Championship. Gonna make sure you're ready for all of your DFS and prop exposure out there for this evening there for PGA and a little bit of Euros golf stuff out there with props as well. But whether you're watching this on replay already down there in the live chat, first off, welcome on in, and hopefully you're having a fantastic day. So we're gonna talk some golf here, get you ready for tomorrow. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to go ahead and throw those down in chat. But we're going to start with a look at the weather, how that'll impact play, then go through our DFS projections, a few players that I'm using myself, and then afterwards, a deep dive of some of the stat averages at each event, as well as a few props that I've already taken. So we've got some Thursday night football tonight. It's a busy day to be a sports fan, but one I wouldn't trade for anything. It's absolutely fantastic. And before we go ahead and truly hop on in, do want to remind you guys of the presenting sponsor of this live stream, which of course, our friends over there at the Ship It Nation, which are a great resource for all your needs on DFS. So whether it's the golf that we're going to talk about today, NFL, NBA, which just came back, NHL, NASCAR, UFC, they've got you covered with all of your exposure. So whether it's with projections, process-based tips, they're a great website for all of that. It's not going to price gouge it in the process. So they've got a partnership going on with the channel here sponsoring these videos. And if you use code Luke10 when you're signing up, you will get a discount off any membership there. So it supports the channel, supports what we're doing here, as well as giving you a discounted rate to the best all-encompassing site in the industry. So make sure to check them out if you guys haven't already. But let's go ahead and hop on in. So in terms of the golf course, it played a lot easier than what we had for last year, which partially was because it was calm out there for round 1, but we shouldn't expect anything different for round 2 as the forecast is almost identical to what we had on Thursday. So it's not necessarily something that we expected to change, but if we go over here to the weather forecast, it's calling for between 9 to 12 miles an hour of sustained wind for much of the day, and the wind gusts in the mid to higher teens, which is exactly what they were calling for out there on Thursday. So it played to about a minus 0.87 scoring average, and I would put the scoring average for round 2 and something between like maybe minus and a half a stroke under, and then an entire stroke under par. So in terms of a wave edge, we've got threesomes off of both holes number 1 and holes 10. So there's not going to be any sort of weather edge to really lean into. But if we do split this by the first and second half of tee times, it was quote unquote 0.4 shots easier out there in the afternoon. But a lot of that was likely just noise variance due to the first and second half of tee times, only having, I believe it was like 38 players in each wave. So you're going to get some noise, some variance to begin with, which I told you would probably happen out there yesterday. So we'll have to see how it shakes out for round number 2. If it's still like 0.4, 0.5 shots easier towards the PM, maybe for rounds 3 and 4, we can adjust our process a bit. But for now, just after a single round sample size, I think it's probably a little bit due to variance. So that's it for the weather forecast. Nothing that crazy, nothing that impactful out there in these forecasts. We'll go through a few other ones. You can see this one's a little bit calmer over here with the icon. The Meteo Blue model in that 8 to 10 mile an hour range. The MSM is way different than all the other ones, so we're going to stay away from that. Doesn't even have wind gust included, so probably not all that important. We go over here to this ECM model. It's in that 10 to 11 mile an hour range. So that's what I'm expecting in terms of course conditions. We'll use that a little bit later on when we talk about props. But now let's bring up our DFS sheet and talk a little bit through the Showdown slate here, which I think is going to be a fun one. It's not one where we have a huge weather edge to lean into, but the game theory is, I think, very interesting. You had a lot of the top-end players struggle out there on Thursday, Xander Schauffele included, who, of course, hit his ball against a root, got absolutely shafted on what I believe was his 9th hole of the day. And if the casuals, the general public, is going to avoid a player like Xander because of a one-hole blow-up, then you might want to play them out there in your round 2 showdown lineup. So round 2 showdown is all about taking advantage of overreactions to a single round sample size. Golf is an extremely variant sport. You see a lot of crazy stuff happen. It's extremely unpredictable, even for the world's best players. So if you're going to use an 18-hole sample size, like what we have at this event so far, and make massive conclusions about a player's performance for round 2, then you're not playing the showdown game the right way. The best way to play your round 2 showdown lineups is to reset everyone in the field to their regular baseline, what you'd expect from them over a long-term sample size, and then play that for round 2 showdown. Because what we get with the ownership are players like Colin Morikawa, who had the best day of anyone up top, a Justin Thomas, for example, a Bo Hostler here with the -4 round, especially guys like an Eric Cole or Grazerman that got to -6 are going to be twice, even 3 times the ownership as some of the other guys around them. So what you do for your round 2 showdown is you don't overreact, right? You don't play like casual, one of the fish out there that are going to look at an 18-hole sample size. It completely changed their outcome and their plan out there for round 2 showdown. Your round 2 showdown should be, okay, long-term, who are the guys that have the highest birdie or better percentage? Who are the best round 2 scorers that we have in this field? Who are the players that hit the ball well and approach in round 1, but maybe didn't get all of it out of their score? Like, those are the kind of things that you want to be looking at for your exposure tonight. Not so much like, is this guy -3, -4 after the first day? So that's what a lot of your casuals are going to do. You want to avoid that leaderboard watching and try and look for more sneaky ways to find your top end plays. So we're going to go through a few of those guys that I think are sneakier options out there for today's slate that aren't going to have all that kind of ownership. So the highest owned player that we're going to talk about will be Xander here in about a minute. And he's 21% owned just because he's the highest owned, highest priced player on the entire slate. And he's clearly the best player on the slate. He would be probably 30, even 35% owned if he had had even a decent round, even like an even par round out there in round number 1. But because he's +3, he's only about 21% owned. A Sahith down here is sub 15% owned, which is a much lower owned than everyone else around them. So I'm really playing that leverage game. That's what you've got when you got a round 2 showdown slate, especially one that doesn't have a huge weather edge to go along with it, right? You've got to try and generate some sort of edge somewhere. And for me, it's going to be out there with the game theory today. So let me catch up on chat, see what's going on down there. See, we got a few comments, and any questions, by the way, feel free to go ahead, let us know down below, and we'll get on after it. What's going on? Illini says primetime golf is always fun, but Golf Channel drops the ball. Yeah, it was crazy. I don't think it started until 11 p.m. Eastern time, which was close to midnight. I know a lot of people were asleep then. What's going on, Antonio? What's going on, Jordan? Xander bounce back is coming. I'm right there with you. And I guess a perfect segue right here. Yeah, if Xander's only going to be like 21% owned, then give me him out there in round 2 showdown. His strokes line on books is at 67.5, and he's like -150 for his under, which would be a whole 2 shots gained to the field. And we know that he's capable of even better than that. So the sports books seem to think that he's going to have a bounce back day. His over at 4.5 birdies is also juiced towards the over. So with all of that, I mean, guys like Hideki as well, he's also at 4.5 birdies and juiced towards the over, which will be helpful when we're talking about props here in about 10-15 minutes. But Xander Schauffele is still the best talent that we have in the entire field, and he's a solid 10% lower owned than what I've got Colin Morikawa at. He's even lower owned than guys like Hideki Matsuyama. So if you're looking for some leverage up here, you're not getting a ton on a 21% owned player. But what you're not getting as well is the mega chalk, the guy that is going to completely derail your ownership out there towards the top end of the board. So that's what I'm trying to avoid out there in my lineups. I'm trying to play this game theory edge as much as humanly possible. And when we have somebody like Xander, who is already the best player in the field, and we can get a slightly lower ownership number, it is just a no-brainer spot. So the sports books, they seem to have a lot of confidence in a bounce back, and in general, the ownership makes a lot of sense. Sahith Theegala doesn't have as much confidence from the sports books. He's at 68.5, and he is just a little bit towards the under. Spoiler alert, though, I still played him for an under at 68.5. So I have a little bit more confidence than the books do in him going low today. And a lot of the other studs, they've got it like 67.5, 67. So he's definitely a little bit higher than some of the other players in this range. And a lot of that's because he shot +2 round number 1. And I don't think he's the greatest course fit. What I do know about Sahith Theegala is that this is a bounce back sort of player. He's an extremely wild player off the tee at times, and he's capable of turning a complete 180 from round to round. I mean, we've seen this guy shoot like +4, +5 round number 1, and then turn around with a -7, -8 round the very next day. In fact, there have been numerous dozens of times just this year alone where I've pointed out Sahith Theegala after a little bit of a shitty round, and he's gone out there and nuked the next day. He's not the kind of player that's going to hang his head, go out out there and not give a shit the next day out there. He's the kind of player that'll grind it out. He knows that any day could be your, nuclear low round that you've been looking for. And when you're a very feel-based player, a very streaky player like Sahith Theegala, who when he starts to hit the ball well, he normally can keep that going for an entire round. Also one of the best putters on the PGA Tour out there with the Sahith Theegala. It makes him an absolute gold mine in Showdown. So he's usually the kind of high upside, wide range of outcome sort of player that I love using in an 18-hole sample size. You saw the negative side of that wide range of outcomes in round number 1, right? 2 over par was nearly 3 strokes worse than the field average, but he also has an extremely high rate of getting to +3, +4 shots gained rounds. That is a much higher rate than even guys like a Sun GM or even a Justin Thomas. So that's why I like him from the Showdown format. He's lower owned than some of the other players in this range. And what we're looking for in Showdown, an 18-hole sample size, isn't so much consistency, 4-round event, an entire event DFS lineup. We're more so looking for somebody that can move up all 4 days. After 4 rounds is going to be in that top 10. Showdown, we need the absolute nuts. We need that guy who's going to have that spike round from -6, -7 round. And Sahith Theegala in that kind of format is much more attractive than usual because that's his thing, going out there and having a spike round. Next up, we got Minwoo Lee. He's there at -1, so had a slightly better round 1. I've still got him at sub 15% ownership, which is about average for this range, maybe even slightly above the average ownership. So if there's a quote-unquote high-owned player in my player pool, it would be Minwoo Lee here at $9,100. But if this is going to be about as high as I'm going in terms of my ownership, then that gives you an idea for just how much I'm leaning into that game theory edge. And what I like about Minwoo is that he's a solid scorer. He's a high birdie or better percentage player, a player with a wide range of outcomes that has that birdie or better firepower. There are certain guys in this field that, their max range of outcomes is maybe a -4, -5 round. Minwoo, if he has his best stuff, could shoot even better than that -7 that we saw from a Taylor Moore. He's a streaky player, kind of like we have here with Sahith, maybe a little bit wild off the tee at times, which is why he has a low floor combined with that high ceiling that we've already mentioned. But I'm okay playing that in large field GBPs where we're looking for the absolute nuts. If you're playing him in a single entry, a cash lineup, then it's a different story. Maybe you use somebody different here rather than a Minwoo Lee. But if you're playing in a contest where you're looking for that -5 or better round, then I really like him in that format, as he's got, just like a Sahith Theegala, a higher chance, a higher +3, +4 shots gained equity than a lot of the other players around him. Will Zalatoris here, $8,900. He'd be an example of a leverage play that you can get here in this top end of the 8K range. So he's about nearly 3 times lower owned, I should say, than a Minwoo Lee. So giving you a bunch of leverage, sub 10%, sub 10% owned. I can't even speak right now. My bad, guys. Let me get a sip of this. Mouth is getting a little dry, making it tough to speak there. But Will Zalatoris is sub 10% owned, which you're not going to find all that often, but you do have that with guys like Doug Gim here. Also, Mav McNeely at $8,700. I've got him at about 7-8% ownership. So you've got players here like Eric Cole, Grazerman that are really soaking up all of that ownership, but around them, a lot of perfectly fine pivots. And sure, they didn't have that -6, that sexy round out there on Thursday, but there's still some world-class players, like especially Will Zalatoris. He started to play a lot more consistent golf towards the end of last season, and now he's at a reasonable $8,900 price tag. I think too cheap for the kind of golf that he's been playing. And now he's also going to be sub 10%. I'm going to be a huge buyer there. Doug Gim, you guys already know I liked him at this event. He was my #1 total model ranking play heading into this week. If he's going to be sub 10% owned, I'm using him out there in my round 2 Showdown lineups. Same thing with Mav. I was high on him heading into this week. Maybe not the hottest start there at $8,700, but if you're going to give me a sub 10% owned number, I'm just going to take advantage of that. So that's what I mean by taking advantage of the overreaction. Is just because somebody played well round 1 does not mean at all that they're going to go out there and repeat that for round 2. So revert a lot of these players back to their baselines heading in, and I think that's a good way to handle the slate. Speaking of, let me get another sip of this. Mouth is extraordinarily dry right now. My bad about that. Tom Hoge here, $8,400 though. I've got him at sub 5% ownership. So about 5.8% of Will Zalatoris was pretty sweet in terms of your leverage. Tom Hoagie's an even better leverage player here at 4.2%. Part of that is the shitty form heading in, on top of the fact that he had a +1 round. So not really turning any heads in terms of how he played, but he played a lot cleaner golf than what we've seen in the last few events. It's been some really shitty off the tee play that has derailed him the last few months. In fact, we take a look at the last 12 measured rounds. You see what's been his bugaboo lately. It's been just about everything into the negative, but most significantly that off the tee play that I was mentioning. So I like the fact that he kept himself a little bit more in line out there on Thursday. Sub 5% owned on a player that is extremely streaky with the irons and the putter. The kind of player that in a showdown format where we're looking for a ceiling outcome has the kind of skill set to get us to a -6, a -7 round. Is an absolute piece of leverage gold there at 4.2%. I've got Max Homa at sub 10% owned as well. So 6.9% projected ownership, which even though he shot +3, he's not my favorite force fit at all, right? I faded him in my main slate lineups. $8,100 though, in sub 10% ownership. Like I'll take a dabble on a player that we know is a lot better than what he's been doing lately. Ben Griffin, I've got sub 5% owned, not even sub 10%. He's down there at sub 5% at 4.7%. He's +1, maybe didn't have his best stuff, but he's at least he has some experience at this golf course, round 1, and then played here last year as well. Ryan Fox at 4.4%. +2 round. You can sense a trend here, right? It's a lot of the guys that kind of just spun their wheels, didn't have their best stuff. This golf course is far from easy. It is not a birdie fest, not even close to it. And if you don't have your best stuff, you're going to get exposed for it. And, if you shoot +1, +2, it's not the end of the world. You're not always going to have your best stuff out there. These sort of players, like especially Ryan Fox, he comes in gaining over a stroke per round over his last 12 measured rounds. Like we're expecting a bounce back from a vast majority of these sort of players. So you give me that sub 5% and I'll definitely take a dabble too. Adam Svensson here, he's at 7.2% ownership. And I want to cross-reference this just to make sure I have the exact number correct. But Adam Svensson had one of the worst putting performances that we've ever seen from him out there in round number 1. He lost 4.9 shots gained to putting in round number 1, which is almost hard to fathom. Hideki Matsuyama also lost 3.88 shots gained to putting out there in round number 1. So you would expect both of those players to have some kind of regression back to the mean. Davis Riley, by the way, also David Skins, both lost over 3 shots gained putting in round 1 as well. But especially with Svensson here, he's only 7.2%. He's been playing really solid golf, gaining nearly a stroke per round over his last 12 measured rounds, and he's only $7,300. Like that's a perfect buyback spot, a perfect buy low spot on the ownership, and hopefully we can get a little bit of a bounce back performance. Last 2 players I want to point out here would be a Ben Coles. I've got about 3.3% ownership. His ball striking heading into this week has been top-notch stuff. Gaining off the tee, gaining on approach, which is what we're looking for with a putting first player like Coles. And then the last guy here is Luke List, who, for whatever reason, the DraftKings algorithm has been just absolutely disrespecting out there in their pricing every single slate. $6,600 for a multiple-time tour winner for a player that has been top 50 on the PGA Tour and birdie or better percentage is crazy for a single round sample. So while he's got a low floor, he makes a lot of bogeys. That's why he hasn't been necessarily killing it the last year in the PGA Tour. He still has a lot of that birdie or better upside, that firepower that I was talking about before, which gives him at least the capability, the potential to go out there and get to -6, -7. There are plenty of players down here in this portion of the board that it's not like they have no chance to shoot -6, -7, but their equity, their 3-4 shots gained equity is fractions compared to guys like Luke List. Like Luke List, he might shoot over par tomorrow 10-15% of the time. Heck, maybe even more than that out there for tomorrow. But his ceiling equity, now I can't give you an exact number on it. I have to run my sims, run my projections in an 80-player field like this. But you'd have to imagine for Luke List, who's an elite tier player in that category, might have a 3 to 5% ceiling rate. You have guys in this range who, in my sims, I ran it for before I ran my projections here. You had guys at sub like 0.3%. That he might be 10 times higher owned, or higher chance, I should say, to go out there and be a ceiling potential than guys like this Rikuya Kinoshita guy. Like, and he's going to be 2.3% owned. He's only $6,600. That's why it doesn't make any sense. A few examples of guys that have that high ceiling potential, by the way, like a Davis Riley, he's got a very wide range of outcomes. Sami Valimaki, same thing. Like you've seen him first round leader a few times. It's because of that ceiling potential. Chris Gotterup, you've seen it from him as well. Like these sort of players, they shouldn't be this cheap. Like there are plenty of guys down here that maybe don't have that same kind of potential that I kind of get it with. Like Joel Damon, he's not really a popper usually out there in Showdown. He's more consistent, and he's been pretty consistently bad recently. Like a Zach Blair is more of a consistent player. Like there are plenty of examples of guys I won't be using down here, but the high upside ones, like a Riley, Luke List is a great example of it, are the kind of guys that in Showdown are fantastic for round 2 Showdown. Like, and he shot -1. It's not even like Luke List played poorly, right? That's not why he's 2.3%. It's because he didn't shoot -4 like Kinoshita. It's because he didn't shoot -6 like Echevarria, which is going to get those guys well over the 5% ownership mark. Luke List, 2.3%, very reasonable right there. You play him in 5% of your lineups, right? 1 out of 20 if you're playing in a 20 max, and that's leverage right there. So that's why I like a play like Luke List so much. The stats for round 1, and by the way, the shots gained metrics, I do want to circle back to this before I answer some of the questions you guys may have. These shots gained metrics, take them with a grain of salt, because I was going through the hole by hole stuff on there. Like even this -4.9 from Adam Svensson, it could be inaccurate because you had shots on there that 100% just could not be correct. Like for example, Bo Hostler had like 80 yards out of the fairway and a 400 and something yard par 4, and it claimed that he hit it 80 yards to 2 fairways over to his right. And he ended up like further from the hole than where he was originally. Like I obviously just don't buy that. There's no way in hell that that's what happened, especially because they claimed that he made par from that spot. So these shots gained metrics over here on Data Golf, they're using the shot trackers that they're being given from the PGA Tour, which undoubtedly have a lot of mistakes this week. Now, could you use them, to help you out with your process? I think that's totally fine, right? I did that in a few cases, but you didn't hear me going and referencing these shots gained metrics maybe as much as usual, and that's the reason for that. So, like these approach numbers, like it's great to see some of these like +3 out there for this Tanzai Shimizu. Probably butchered that name, but I tried. Like he may have actually gained 3 shots gained approach, but he may not have, right? It may have been a few mistakes out there in the shot tracker as well. So just, I guess, keep that in mind when you're looking at some of that. Let me bring up our projections and let me catch up on chat, guys. And then we'll do some lineup construction notes, and then we're going to go through props. So where are we at? Thoughts on JT from round 2? He looks like vintage JT. I like that I played him for main slate, but I don't know if I could hop on for round 2 because it feels like you're around late. If you're chasing that steam, maybe if it's happened over the first 3 days, you jump on for round 4. But after a single round sample size, I usually have a tough time wanting to join the bandwagon, as golf is an up and down roller coaster, right? If you're trying to jump on the roller coaster while it's on the way down, well, you might miss your seat, is what I'll say about that. What am I doing with Homa? Bounce back, or is this game still broken? So I think that he's a potential bounce back. He's a very risky option, though. A lot of your bounce backs, your lower round plays for round 2 Showdown are risky, but in the right format, in the right kind of contest, that's a good thing, right? That's kind of what you're looking for, like in the big GPP, for example. So I think if you're playing in a GPP, he's definitely in play. Cash, single entries is where I'd probably think about that twice. I probably wouldn't use them there. Where was a tracking shot tracker, it was so messed up for you. It was terrible, dude. It was typical, though, of one of these international events. They usually have the B team running some of the shots gained stuff. Nico gaining 4 shots gained putting and lock them for round 2. Yeah, you don't want to tail that kind of thing. So I will say the shots gained metrics could be a little bit off. But yeah, 4 shots gained putting for anybody is going to be tough to replicate. Can Lauer bounce back and go lower in round 2? Okay, I see what you did there. Little pun on the word Lauer. I would say he could. I don't know if he's my favorite play, though. I mean, let me look at the shots gained metrics, I guess. I can't sleep on him before I completely deep dive him. Lost a bunch putting, lost 2 strokes on approach. Yeah, I think he's going to shoot better than the +4 you had out there round 1, but the shots gained profiles, it ain't pretty. Lee Hodges, well, he was a decent play for me heading into this week. The shots gained profile is pretty average out there from Thursday. He gained off the tee, he gained on approach, and was about average in the 2 short game categories. So that's kind of like the sleeping giant stat profile where you're not playing great, you're not playing horribly, but your quote unquote strength, the 2 categories that he gained in were the 2 most important categories: your ball striking, your off the tee, and your iron play. So I would say that he's probably like a 7.5, 8 out of 10 out there for me in round 2 showdown. And I'll just tell you, I'm playing him. Chan Kim going nuclear? I hope so. He's one of my super low-owned plays that I'm getting to, Kim. So just like Lee Hodges, he is in my player pool, and part of that is the low ownership that you can get on Chan Kim. And he's a top 10 birdie maker on the PGA Tour this year. Something that I don't think a lot of people know about Chan Kim in his game is he's a wild player. He goes for it. He takes aim at every single pin, which in Showdown is kind of what we're looking for. Shot Checker says JT missed a 9-inch putt. Yeah, there's no way, right? Like there are certain things that I see on some of the shot trails that it's just baloney. Like my favorite though are the ones where they're saying people are hitting like the other green and then 2 putting there for par. Like Sun GM, they showed him hitting one of the other par 3 greens, and it was like an impossible up and down. I mean, it was short-sided from like 60 yards, and they claimed that he made par. So I don't know. If he did, great up and down, I guess, Sanjay, but something tells me that there's something fishy going on there. Let me bring up DraftKings. We're going to build a lineup together to give you guys an idea of what I'm thinking through when building lineups for round 2. And it's not quite as complicated as what's going to be for round 4 showdown, especially because I'm going so much with the game theory edge. Because my player pool is almost entirely averagely owned players, if not below average ownership out there for almost every player that I'm using, I don't have to think very much when I'm building my lineups. In fact, I can almost just build my player pool, right? Exit out the guys that I don't want to use in my optimizer and just build lineups like that alone. Now, if you're only building 4 or 5, I would recommend going through doing the hand build approach, right? Making sure that your lineups all check out. But if you're entering 20 lineups and you have that kind of player pool, you can probably do that. Like I know we like to talk about lineup construction. I know as content creators try and make it seem harder than it is at times, but it's not, right? It's not really all that difficult if you have a low-owned player pool. If you have a low-owned player pool, pretty much any combination that you're going with is going to give you enough leverage out there in the large field GPPs. Where you have to get a little bit worried about your ownership is if you're starting with a Morikawa or a Justin Thomas. Let's say that you want to tail that low score round 1. Like, I get it. They played well. Like I understand that train of thought. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to offset it with some ownership down towards the bottom. So, I could bore you to death. Just click in all those low-owned players that I'm using. But for the sake of this, and this is not a lineup that I'd be building myself, I'm going to start it off a little bit chalkier to show you how you can offset starting a little bit chalkier towards the top. So we're going to start Morikawa. We're going to go GT as our second man in. And that's probably the chalkiest start that you could go with towards the top end of the board. And even if we're just using 2 players that are the quote unquote chalk for round 2 showdown, you're already going to have to start to consider the ownership angle. So that's even down here in the 8K range. Like you can't be careless about who you're playing, which means a Grazerman and Eric Cole, potentially even players like Putnam or Rico Hoey, or maybe guys that you'd want to consider fading. So if you wanted leverage, we know Max Homa would give you relatively low ownership. Seamus Power, same thing. So I'm going to throw in Seamus Power here just because he's also a little bit cheaper, gives you $100 savings. We're down to $7,300 for our last 3 spots, which means we can probably go to the mid to middle top of this 7K range for our 4th man in. And because we went pretty chalky with our first 2, we can't get careless with the ownership here either. So Taylor Moore for sure rolled out as a piece of chalk out there for tomorrow. Even guys like Johnny Vegas, a Hoey, it would probably still be out of play there at -3. So I'm going to throw in a Ben Griffin here. And, if we had started, let's say, a little bit more different towards the top. Let's say that we went Hideki, who he's still getting some ownership, but he's lower owned than what you have there with Morikawa. And then rather than going with JT, maybe we chose a Thigala instead. They're at $9,700. If we started with these 2 players, we wouldn't be having this conversation here in the 7K range. Like if we really like Johnny Vegas, we're clicking Johnny Vegas out there in this kind of lineup. But because we decided to start with a Morikawa and a JT, again, that's the more interesting build where you're starting to have to actually think about ownership in your lineups. you have to second guess whether we want to use a Johnny Vegas. And if we really wanted to force him into a build, you could still make it work out there in this kind of lineup. Our last two spots, though, are going to have to be sub 5%. So if we went with this kind of build, we certainly could not take somebody like KH Lee towards the bottom end of the 7K range. It's just a far too chalky play. In fact, we'd have to force in potentially a Ryan Fox, a Chan Kim. He's going to be around 5% ownership, and round it off with another leverage piece down here, which also means we'd have to avoid a guy like a Kevin Yu. He's getting some ownership here at $6,900. So there's always pros and cons to taking pieces of chalk, and that's why I'm avoiding it out there in my lineups. It simplifies my 7K process. It's not so much that I like the chalk down here in the 7K range. It's just that there's guys in that 5 to 10% range. Like, for example, a Johnny Vegas that I think is a decent play out there. Like a Mark Hubbard, he's over 5%. He's not like high owned, but he's not going to be a sub 5% owned diamond in the rough. If you want to be able to take non-diamonds in the rough in the 7K range, you can't have all the chalk towards the top end of the board. So that's why I'm choosing to build with a more leveraged fashion out there in my round 2 lineups. And not that you have to do that yourself, but I think that there's a good argument for going out there and doing so. So that's what I'll say about the lineup construction. We'll go over there to the prop side now, unless anyone has any questions. And it looks like we're good on questions for now. So that's all I've got for DFS. If you're just here for that, go ahead and smash the like button before you guys hop on out of here. And also best of luck with all of your lineups. But if you had any questions and you weren't able to ask them quite yet, you can still throw those down there in the live chat. But our focus for the next 10, 15 minutes here is going to be on props. So let me bring up Prize Picks. Let me bring up Underdog as well. There's already a bunch of prop exposure that I've entered. And a few things on the Euro golf side that are going to lock here soon. So I want to make sure that we can get into this before that potentially happens. So there's Prize Picks. Okay, there's Underdog. And I also want to bring up Draftkings and FanDuel because they all have odds posted, which is great. I was not expecting that. They've been a little lazy about it here during the fall swing, but they blessed us with some odds here for the slate. So I got Draftkings up, and let me bring up FanDuel. If I bring these up beforehand, for some reason, if you don't bring up the tab for like a half an hour to an hour, it just bugs out. So have to do it on live stream. But here we go. So, all right, let's talk through the prop side. So I've got the averages here on the screen. You can read them, obviously, at your own leisure. But I would expect these to be pretty spot in line with what we're going to get for round 2. Because whether it's the PGA forecast, it looks pretty similar to what we had on Thursday. And if you take a look at the Eurogolf forecast as well, it's also very similar to what we had for Thursday. So that actually started 20 minutes ago. They had their first tee time at 6:10 p.m. So on Underdog, they actually locked the entire Eurogolf board. So there's not going to be anything that you can bet there for Euro. But Prize Picks is locking guys as they actually start. So on Prize Picks, we can potentially get to some Eurogolf stuff. But these averages for either event, whether it's PGA or Euro, I would expect to be pretty applicable to what we're going to get out there tomorrow. And in terms of exposure, I guess we'll start over here on Underdog. Actually, they took off that one prop. So we're just going to do our stuff over here in Prize Picks. By the way, the boards between Prize Picks and Underdog are the exact same. So it really doesn't matter where you play. I was more so just going to try and give you guys one slip on either site. But the piece of exposure that I took over here on Underdog was PGA and Euro, and they locked the board when everyone teed off. So you can see over there, right? The golf is over there in black. So can't do that anymore. So we'll just stick to Prize Picks. But if there's anything from the Prize Picks side that you guys want to enter over there on Underdog, obviously feel free to go ahead and do so yourself. But over here with our props, it's going to be relatively similar conditions. And while this isn't an easy golf course, you've got some pretty shitty players bogging down these scoring averages. So they go over here back to the live model over here in Data Golf, show you guys these scoring averages. It was a minus 0.87 scoring average. But we got to remember that we've got guys on this field that aren't even PGA Tour players. Like Takumi Kanaya is not a shitty player. Shuga Imahira, like we've seen him around before. Even Rikuya Kinoshita, like we've seen him around before. But like this Tanzai Shimizu, like I legitimately have no idea who the fuck that is. Like there are certain guys, especially some of the Japan Tour players. Awada, like the only reason I know him is because he's played in this event like 3 or 4 times. But other than that, I have no idea who the hell he is. Like this Ren Yonzawa guy. Like I have no prior knowledge for a lot of these players. it's essentially like an even weaker fall series event. So these elite tier players like a Xander, a Hideki, a lot of the guys who struggled out there in round number 1, they're projecting for well better than this average. So that's why it's so surprising that guys like Xander shot +3. Like you had a guy like Sahith shoot +2, even Hideki here at +1. Because if anything, we would think that they would be the outliers on the other side of things, right? Shooting like -5, -6, and bringing the average down. So I think for round 2 props, we're getting this kind of situation where like a lot of the pricing I think is soft because those elite tier players didn't go off. Like if you had guys like Xander, for example, Hideki, all of them shooting -4, -5 round number 1, like they'd be at 66.5, 67 strokes, like no doubt about it. But what we're getting instead is guys like them at 67.5 strokes, right? So they're like 0.5 to an entire stroke higher than where they otherwise would be. Like even Sahith here, right? He shot +2 round 1. He's at 68.5, which the average, if we take a look at the scoring average, was just over 69 strokes. And if we're accounting for the fact they have so many shitty Japan Tour players out there in this field, the actual scoring average for PGA Tour players is well under 1 under par. So if the scoring average is about 69, I mean, players like a Thigala, he was one of the top 3 best odds to go out there and win this golf tournament. I mean, he's averaging well over a shots gained per round in this kind of field. So these guys, I think, have relatively soft projections, even though this isn't an easy golf course, just because of how they played in round number 1. So to give you an idea, I really like this under on Xander Schauffele strokes. Not only is he more than capable of gaining 2 strokes to the field, which is essentially what he's going to have to do to go out there and shoot -3. But if you take a look at his round score prop, he's -150 towards the under. So you can see over here is under at 67.5 is juiced there at -150. So we go over here to FanDuel, by the way, just to cross-reference it with a few other sites. They've got him at -140, which is well into that plus EV range. So that's what I mean when I say some of these like lines are soft. Is, I mean, if he had a good round 1, forget about it. He'd be at least 67 strokes, if not down there at 66.5. So it's not an easy course, but it's also not an impossible golf course if you're keeping yourself in position. And one would have to think that Xander Schauffele is not going to wedge himself against a tree root very often and make a quad bogey like he did in round number 1. In terms of some of the Eurogolf stuff, I like this over on Tom Kim quite a bit. So if I had to find like my favorite 2 props, it would be these 2. So Tom Kim, he tees off here in 3 minutes. So be really quick about this, and I'll show you why I like it real quickly. He is -150 for his over on birdies. So I thought he locked a little bit later. So my apologies, and only giving you guys a few minutes to lock this in. But you can see right there, he is also -150 for his over. So birdie average was 3.52 per round. So he's going to have to do significantly better than the field to get there. But this DP World Tour field is even weaker than what we have here in the PGA Tour side. So you have to imagine that a top tier birdie maker like Tom Kim is averaging at least a birdie higher than the field. And when you give me that -150 juice towards the over and some calm morning conditions, I'll play that. So yeah, I guess you're going to have to be quick to lock that in. If you're watching this on replay, you probably can't take that. So the other DP World Tour prop that I took that I used to potentially offset that was the multiplier. So this pays 3x because it's a PGA plus a Euro prop. Was this Richard Mansell over on birdies. So he's at 3.5 birdies. He's up there in the top 3 after round number 1. And he's a top 20 birdie percentage player on the DP World Tour. So it's not like this is even like an average player in this kind of field. And the field average was 3.52 birdies per round. And he has a PMT time, so you're going to have a lot longer to get this in if you are watching this on replay. And what I like about Mansell is conditions are actually supposed to get calmer as the day goes on. So they'll be calm in the morning, but they're supposed to get even better as the day goes on. And it's also going to get a little bit warmer. So I think the scoring average will probably stay pretty flat between morning and afternoon. But unlike a lot of slates where the PM wave is the harder side of things, I don't necessarily think that's what we're going to get there. So that's why I'm playing this over at 3.5 birdies. We know the form is there with him being top 3 after round number 1, and he's a top 20 birdie percentage player on the DP World Tour to begin with. So for him to be at the field average in a pretty weak field is, in my opinion, a mistake in terms of that projection. So if you can't get the Tom Kim, that's what I would take right now. He's still got a minute to go out there and take that one, but you could take the Richard Mansell prop as well. And then another prop I took, let's say that you only want to do like a PGA slip, which Hey, if you're not watching the DP World Tour, I couldn't blame you for that. I like this Hideki Matsuyama over on birdies as well. So you may have seen this when I was over on FanDuel before, but Hideki Matsuyama is minus 140 for the over on his birdies. If you take a look at Caesars, so we go over here and we change this to the PGA board as opposed to the DP World Tour that we were just looking at. Get a sip of that. Hideki Matsuyama is, I believe, minus 140, so minus 130 for his over here on Caesar / William Hill. So you've got a minus 150 prop, you've got a minus 130, minus 140, depending on which book that you're looking at. 2+ EV props. So you are getting a slightly lower payout because this is correlated, but it's 2+ EV correlated props. Like, I'm okay with taking a slightly lower payout when we have both the plus EV juice going for us and we have that correlation in our back pocket. So I'm not usually a huge fan of taking lower payouts on these prop books, but I'll do so in certain cases. And this is one of the few cases that I will. So a few props that I've mixed in. The Euro Golf stuff, it's nice because it gets rid of the multiplier, but you're also getting rid of some of the correlation. So it's nice to get the 3x payout, but I do like myself some correlation there as well. Let's see. Shot tracker. That's right. We already went through that. What do I think about when X tried to hit the ball from outside the route? I was shocked too. So yeah, you said you were shocked that he didn't take the unplayable. I think that he thought he'd get out. You know, I'm a arrogant golfer as well. You know, you get into a bad spot and you're like, you know what? I'm gonna bail myself out of this, right? I got myself into the trouble. Let me get myself out. But a lot of times it works against you. If it was Jordan Spieth, I wouldn't have been surprised at all that he went for the recovery shot. But I was a little bit surprised because it's Xander Schauffele. He had such a good year. He really doesn't have that much to play for in this fall swing. Like, he's accomplished more than enough here in 2024. So I was a little bit surprised that he hit the ball. Even more surprised that he hit it a second time. Right after he did it the first time, you think that he'd, you know, smarten up a little bit, right, and try and take that drop. But hey, he knows now. He learned from it. That's for sure. He's not going to make that same kind of mistake as quickly next time. At least you'd hope that he'd do that. So if you're going to enter over here on Underdog, they took those DP World Tour props down, getting back into the prop side here. So if you're going to enter anything, you have those PGA props available, but you're going to get the same, if not a worse payout on most of them. So like, just to show you what I'm talking about, like if you take the under on strokes there and then you take the over on Hideki, they're only paying you 2.58x. So they've got an even worse correlation bump over here on this side, which is just another reason to play it on Prize Picks, right? You're getting 2.75x over here. That's nearly 0.2 units higher over there on that site. So just make sure you're getting the best payout available when you're going out there and entering anything on these sites. I know it seems like a small difference, but they really add up if you're entering a bunch of different slips. So if you guys want to see all the different exposure that I'm getting to out here for today, whether it's on DP World Tour, if you see anything on that side, I'll be adding stuff, or the PGA Tour stuff throughout the night. Make sure to check out my Patreon page for all of that, as well as the spreadsheets that you see for DFS. On there, all the stuff that was blacked out can be found there on the Patreon page, including my player pool, projections for everyone, ownership out there for the entire field, and all the prop slips I'm taking on the Underdog and Prize Picks. But I've got some Thursday night football stuff to get to. We've got the inactives dropping in a minute and a half. So I've got to go make sure I'm staying on top of that for my Patreon members. But best of luck out there for all of your exposure this evening, whether it's on props or for DFS. And if you're doing some Thursday night football stuff too, I apologize for not having out a piece of content for that. I had some technical difficulties today. I had to get a brand new monitor because I had it completely blacked out on me. Wouldn't even turn on this morning. I thought potentially my computer was fried, but luckily it was just my monitor. So it was like a $150 fix, not a $3,000-$4,000 fix like it would have been if it was my computer. So sucks that we couldn't get the preview out, but at least it wasn't a $4,000 bill. So best of luck tonight, guys. Hopefully you guys can run good, go out there, take something down, and let's have ourselves an evening. And I'll see you guys for the round 3 and 4 live streams.